I knew something was wrong the second I saw two guys in cheap security uniforms standing at my elderly dad's front door, acting like they were in an episode of Cops. One had a clipboard, the other had sunglasses on at 7 in the evening. And right behind them, arms crossed like she was Queen of Suburbia, stood her royal pain in the neck herself, Carla Withers, the HOA president. I pulled into my dad's driveway a little harder than I meant to, tires crunching over the gravel. My dad, Harold, 81 and just out of the hospital the week before, was standing there looking confused, gripping his walker like it might suddenly turn into a sword. I jumped out of my truck. "What's going on here?" Carla turned to me with that nose in the air tone she always uses when she's about to pull something shady. "Mr. Holloway, your father is in violation of HOA Regulation 14B, unauthorized flag display. These gentlemen from HOA enforcement are here to issue a fine." I looked at the two clowns in front of me. One of them gave me the kind of nod you'd expect from someone who's watched too many cop shows. "Sir, we need your father to sign this citation." "HOA enforcement?" I asked, stepping between them and my dad. "Since when does the HOA have its own cops?" The clipboard guy cleared his throat. "We're volunteers with the HOA Enforcement Task Patrol. We're authorized to issue penalties." I looked down at the paper. It wasn't even on letterhead, just a printed Word doc with the HOA's name typed at the top in bold Comic Sans. "This isn't real." Carla's voice sharpened. "It's absolutely real. He's flying a non-standard flag that wasn't approved by the board. We're well within our rights." "You're not a cop, Carla. And neither are these two." "Sir, step back," said Sunglasses, puffing up like he was about to reach for a badge that didn't exist. I pulled out my phone and dialed. "Who are you calling?" Carla snapped. "The actual police." I held her gaze. "You know, the ones with real badges." She laughed, but it was that nervous kind of laugh where you know someone's bluff is about to implode. Dad leaned over to me. "All I did was hang my Marine Corps flag." "Same one I've had up since '78. "I know, Dad." 15 minutes later, a real sheriff's deputy rolled up. "Deputy Marquez." "Good guy." Knew my dad by name. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, taking in the scene. Carla stepped forward like she was the one who called him. "Officer, this man's property is in violation of HOA code." Deputy Marquez held up a hand. "Ma'am, I'm asking him," he said, nodding at me. I explained everything. The fake citation. The fake uniforms. The made-up task patrol. Marquez turned to the two wannabe enforcers. "Do either of you have any law enforcement credentials?" "No, sir, but the HOA designated us as turn around." "Hands behind your back." The guy with the clipboard froze. "Wait, what?" "You're impersonating law enforcement, issuing fraudulent citations, and trespassing on private property." Carla's composure cracked. But they're acting under HOA authority." Marquez turned to her. "And you authorized this?" Her lips parted, then closed. "Well, I mean, the board, you're under investigation now too." I looked over at my dad, who was now sitting on the porch bench, watching the whole thing with a grin spreading across his face. "About time," he muttered. And just like that, the HOA's little pretend police force got hauled off in a very real cruiser. 3 days after the arrests, things got quiet, but not in a good way. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like something's building behind the scenes. I stopped by my dad's place every evening after work, half expecting another HOA stunt. The Marine flag was still up, fluttering in the breeze like it had every day for decades. On Thursday, a plain envelope showed up in my dad's mailbox. No return address. Inside was a letter stating his property would be subject to an emergency compliance hearing in 5 days. The language was vague and threatening. No explanation. No details, just a date, time, and a warning that failure to appear may result in further municipal escalation. I read it twice, then handed it to Dad. He squinted at it. "Is this even legal?" "No," I said. "And it's not even printed on HOA letterhead. They're trying to intimidate you without leaving fingerprints." Dad leaned back in his chair. "They're trying to rattle me. They're forgetting who they're dealing with," I said. That night, I sent an email to the county clerk's office and copied the city attorney. I wanted to know if this so-called hearing had any legitimacy. The next morning, I got a phone call from a woman named Lisa Morales, assistant city attorney. "There's no record of any municipal hearing," she said. "That letter didn't come from us. And if they're using official-sounding language to intimidate residents, that's a serious problem. Can the city do anything about it? If you can get me proof it came from someone in the HOA, we can pursue legal action." Mail fraud, intimidation, unauthorized use of municipal language, it adds up quickly. That afternoon, I drove over to the HOA office. It was a converted storage room inside the clubhouse with a laminated sign on the door that read "Authorized Personnel Only." I knocked twice before pushing it open. Inside, Carla was hunched over a desk, flipping through a manila folder like she was prepping for a Senate hearing. She looked up and froze when she saw me. "You're not allowed in here," she said. "I'm a resident's son. That gives me standing. Besides, I'm not here to argue." "Then what do you want?" I placed the letter on the desk between us. "Did you send this?" She didn't touch it. "We issue hearing notices when necessary. This one wasn't necessary. And it wasn't issued through any documented HOA process. You wouldn't understand. The board has internal protocols. Then you won't mind showing them to me." She hesitated. "Meetings like this can't be disclosed to non-board members." I leaned in. "That's not how HOA bylaws work. And if you're forging letters to scare an elderly veteran, that's not just unethical, it's criminal. The city attorney is already involved." Her face twitched. "I hope you kept copies," I added. "Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time explaining why residents are receiving threats from a ghost committee. I think you should leave." I didn't argue. I walked out calmly, but not before glancing at the printer in the corner. A single sheet sat in the tray with the words, "Compliance Action Notice, Immediate Response Required," in bold. That night, I installed a front-facing security camera on my dad's porch. He didn't object. In fact, he insisted on helping hold the ladder. Something about the quiet determination in his eyes told me he'd been waiting for this kind of fight. 2 mornings later, just after dawn, the camera caught what we needed. A man in a dark hoodie jogged up the driveway, slipped a folded paper into the mailbox, and darted away. He didn't notice the new lens mounted above the porch light. I paused the footage and zoomed in. "That's Todd," Dad said. "He's Carla's nephew. Always loitering around her yard." I brought the footage to Lisa Morales that afternoon. She watched it without speaking, then turned to me. "This is enough to open a mail fraud investigation through the U.S. Postal Inspector's Office. And I'll be forwarding this to the district attorney. Will it stick?" If that letter was meant to mislead or intimidate and it was delivered through the mail, absolutely. Add an impersonating government correspondence? That's federal. An hour later, I got a call from a detective with the Postal Inspector's Office. He asked me to provide the letter, the footage, and a written statement. By the next morning, both Carla and Todd had been served subpoenas. Meanwhile, the HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting not to address the ongoing investigation, but to vote on removing my dad's flag again. I showed up with a printed copy of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005 and handed it to every board member before the meeting started. Carla tried to dismiss it. "That doesn't override HOA standards," she said. "It overrides anything that restricts the right to display a military or U.S. flag," I countered. "You can't enforce what's already illegal." More than half the room was made up of other residents. Word had spread. Neighbors who usually stayed silent were now watching closely. One by one, people started speaking up. Mrs. Jensen stood up first. "My grandson's a Marine. That flag's staying." Then Mr. Patel, "If you're using fake hearings and made-up cops, what else have you lied about?" Carla tried to gavel the meeting to order, but it was too late. The board voted to suspend all enforcement actions pending a full audit. 2 days later, subpoenas were issued for HOA financial records. Turns out Carla had approved reimbursements to Todd and 2 others for security services. Thousands of dollars had been funneled through vague line items like field inspections and compliance patrols. The DA's office froze the HOA's discretionary funds and launched a full criminal probe. Carla was arrested on charges of fraud, misuse of HOA funds, and conspiracy to intimidate a resident under false authority. Todd was charged with mail fraud and impersonation. The rest of the board scrambled. One resigned immediately. Another tried to claim he'd been left in the dark, but emails surfaced showing he'd signed off on the fake citations. By the end of the month, the entire HOA board was dissolved by court order. A city-appointed interim manager took over operations and a new election was scheduled with oversight from the county. This time, ballots had to be verified by address and ID. I walked into my dad's house the night we got the news and found him pouring 2 glasses of iced tea. "They're gone?" he asked. "All of them." He handed me a glass. About time someone cleaned house. The next week, a new sign went up in the community center, Resident Town Hall, all voices welcome. The flag still hung, same spot as always, undisturbed. And for the first time in years, the only thing on people's porches was sunlight. The fallout spread faster than anyone expected. Within a week, the interim manager brought in by the city had set up a temporary office in what used to be the HOA's compliance center, replacing the laminated signs with actual transparency. A community bulletin board was installed outside with printed notices about open meetings, volunteer roles, and most importantly, how to report past abuses anonymously. But just because the old board was gone didn't mean their damage was over. On a gray Monday morning, I got a call from Lisa Morales. Her voice was tight. "We need to talk. There's new information." I met her at City Hall that afternoon. She had a folder in front of her, thicker than the one she'd shown me last time. She slid it across the table. "We've been digging through the HOA's financial records. It's worse than we thought." I opened it. Inside were copies of bank transfers, invoices, and scanned handwritten notes. One stuck out immediately, a payment labeled Property Transition Consulting, issued to a shell company registered under Todd's name. "What's this?" I asked. "Your dad's house. They were preparing to claim it." I stared at her. "They were trying to steal his house?" She nodded. "They had a quiet plan in place: target elderly residents with fake violations, rack up unpaid fines, then declare liens. Once the liens hit a certain threshold, they'd move to foreclose." I sat back, stunned. "That's organized theft. And it wasn't just your dad. We've confirmed at least 5 other cases where inflated fines were followed by suspicious property transfers. All of them went through the same LLC, which was registered to Carla's cousin, under a different name. They were using the HOA as a front to take people's homes." Lisa nodded again. "We're treating this as a criminal enterprise now. RICO charges are on the table." I let that sink in. Racketeering. That wasn't just a slap on the wrist. That was federal prison time. That night, I called a neighbor I hadn't seen in a while, Mr. Wexler, a retired postal worker who used to chat with my dad over the fence. He picked up after 2 rings. "Yeah, I knew something was off," he said after I explained what we'd found. "They tried it on me last year. Said I owed $4,000 in landscape violations. I paid half just to shut them up." "You still have those notices?" "Sure do. Never throw anything away when it comes certified." I drove over and scanned every document into a USB stick. Lisa was thrilled. The next evening, I stopped by the interim HOA meeting. It was standing room only. People were angry, but not just at the board, at themselves for trusting too long. I waited until the floor was opened for comments and stepped up. "I know a lot of you feel fooled. So did we. But there's something you need to understand. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was a coordinated scam. They tried to take my dad's house. And they would have done it to more of you." Gasps rippled through the room. A woman near the back raised her hand. "They told me I had to give up my shed last year or face legal action. Made me sign something I never saw again." Another man spoke up. "I paid nearly $1,500 for a supposed fence infraction in cash. No receipt." The interim manager, a calm woman named June from the city's housing department, stood at the front of the room and held up a form. "If any of you believe you were pressured, fined without documentation, or coerced into signing anything, fill this out. We're compiling a full case file for the district attorney's office." The line to the table where the forms were stacked was immediate. Later that week, I got a knock at the door just as I was fixing the hinge on Dad's storm window. It was Deputy Marquez again, notebook in hand. "We've got a warrant for Todd's property," he said, "but we're looking for any documentation you think might help. Emails, voicemails, anything recent." I handed him a printed email I'd received the day before from a burner account calling itself HOA Oversight Liaison. It accused me of interfering with private administrative processes and warned me to cease all public accusations or face legal consequences. He whistled low. "They're still trying to scare you. Let them." 2 days later, Todd's house was raided. Neighbors watched from behind curtains and hedges as boxes were hauled out. One box dropped open on the porch, revealing a stack of printed notices identical to the fake citation my dad got, dozens of them, all pre-filled with names of residents and dollar amounts. One read, "Foreclosure Initiation Package." The state's attorney general announced a formal investigation into fraudulent property seizures across multiple HOAs in the region. Turns out Carla had contacts in 3 other associations and used similar tactics in each. Coordinated schemes, fake fines, forced ownership transfers. The scale of it stunned even the prosecutors. By the following Friday, Carla was re-arrested, this time on charges of wire fraud, racketeering, and real estate fraud. Todd was hit with additional charges for document forgery and illegal surveillance. Apparently, he tried to install motion sensors near certain homes to track comings and goings, hoping to catch elderly residents violating occupancy terms. That alone added 2 more felony counts. But the real moment that hit home came a week later, during a town hall hosted by the city. Every resident was invited. The auditorium was packed. A woman in her 70s stepped up to the mic. "I almost lost my home over a flower bed. They said the color violated Section 9. They fined me every month until I had to choose between groceries and my mortgage." She paused, voice cracking. "I didn't think anyone would believe me. Now I know I wasn't alone." After her, a man in a wheelchair rolled forward. "They sent me 6 letters in 2 months, all demanding I remove my ramp. Said it disrupted the neighborhood's aesthetic. I thought I was the problem." You could feel the shift in the room. The shame that had kept people quiet was turning into fury and action. The city announced they'd be drafting new legislation requiring all HOAs to register enforcement actions with a state-monitored database. No more secret fines. No more fake hearings. Every action would be traceable, appealable, and documented. A month later, my dad was nominated to join the newly formed ethics committee for the HOA. He laughed when they asked him. "I spent 40 years fighting bureaucrats in Washington," he said. "May as well add a few more amateurs to the list." He accepted. By the end of the summer, 5 properties that had been seized under fraudulent liens were returned to their rightful owners. One of them belonged to a woman who'd been couch surfing with her sister after being evicted over unpaid fines she never received copies of. Her face lit up when the city delivered the news. "I thought it was gone for good," she whispered. "It wasn't. Justice, slow as it was, had found its way to our street. And it didn't come with fake badges or clipboards. It came with subpoenas, court orders, and the voices of neighbors who finally refused to be silent." And the Marine flag? Still flying. Still untouchable. Just like the man who never let them scare him down. The first court hearing was scheduled for early October. My dad and I arrived 20 minutes early, not because we needed to, but because he insisted on being punctual, Marine habits and all. He wore his dress jacket with the metal pins still intact, even though I told him it wasn't necessary. The courthouse lobby was buzzing. Reporters lingered near the entrance, scribbling notes and adjusting camera tripods. We weren't the only ones there. At least a dozen neighbors had shown up to watch the proceedings. Some of them victims, others just tired of being lied to. Inside the courtroom, Todd sat beside a public defender, fidgeting with his collar like it was made of sandpaper. Carla, on the other hand, looked like she was trying to reclaim control by sheer force of posture, chin high, arms folded, eyes forward. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, entered and got right to business. The prosecutor introduced the charges: mail fraud, impersonation of a government officer, embezzlement, unlawful surveillance, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Then came the kicker: racketeering under the state's organized crime statutes. I glanced at Carla. Her confidence cracked for the first time. Her eyes darted toward her attorney, who leaned in and whispered something without looking at her. The judge called the first witness a forensic accountant who'd been assigned to the case by the Attorney General's office. He detailed how HOA funds were rerouted through 3 shell companies, each tied to Carla's extended family. None of them had legitimate tax filings. None had physical offices. The money had been used for compliance bonuses, community security enhancements, and administrative training. All vague, all fabricated. Next came a digital forensics expert who walked the court through Todd's surveillance setup. Hidden motion sensors, Bluetooth-enabled recorders, and even a wireless signal scrambler found in his garage. Apparently, he tried to interfere with some residents' doorbell cameras during their so-called compliance visits. That one got an audible reaction from the gallery. The judge didn't flinch. She scribbled notes and occasionally raised an eyebrow, but otherwise kept a tight lid on the room. When it was my turn to testify, I kept it short. I walked them through how I found the fake citation, the fake uniforms, and how I called the police. I submitted the original video footage from my dad's porch and the printed copies of the fraudulent letters. Then I handed over the email from the burner account that had threatened me after the arrests. The defense tried to argue that the board had been overzealous but not criminal, that they were misled by unclear bylaws. The judge stopped them cold. Are you suggesting your clients misunderstood the difference between real law enforcement and dressing up their relatives in discount uniforms? The defense attorney shut the folder in front of him. By the 3rd day of hearings, the scope of the operation had widened. The state had opened a parallel investigation into 3 other HOAs where similar enforcement patrols had been quietly tested. Same tactics, same fake citations, same shell companies. But it wasn't just the fraud that buried them, it was the paper trail. Carla had kept everything: meeting minutes, reimbursement slips, handwritten notes about target homes. It looked like she'd believed her own fantasy of authority so much that she didn't think she'd ever be questioned. The final witness was a former board member who had turned state's witness in exchange for immunity. He confirmed that Carla had pitched the idea of private compliance officers as a way to discourage resistance from uncooperative residents. He testified that she had personally approved every uniform, citation template, and training session, if you could call watching reruns of police dramas training. The judge recessed for deliberation and returned after a lunch break that felt like hours. She read the verdicts without ceremony. Guilty on all counts. Both of them. Todd's sentencing was set for 6 years minimum, with the possibility of more pending federal charges. Carla's was longer. The racketeering conviction alone ensured she'd be behind bars for at least a decade, with restitution required to every resident they'd stolen from. But what really stayed with me was what the judge said before wrapping up. This court recognizes the courage of residents who refused to be intimidated, especially those who stood up not just for themselves but for their neighbors. These crimes were not just about money. They were about power and the abuse of it. Outside the courthouse, the mood was different than I expected. There were no cheers or applause. Just quiet conversations, people exchanging nods, a few hugs. Relief more than anything. We drove back to the neighborhood in silence, the kind that says more than words. My dad looked out the window, his hand resting on the door handle, thumb tapping slowly. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said eventually. "Me neither." He turned to me. "But I'm glad we didn't let it go." The next month brought more changes. A city task force was formed to audit HOA behavior across the county. A hotline was established for residents to report suspicious activity, and a public database of enforcement actions was launched. Any HOA that issued a fine had to list it within 24 hours with a documented reason and a copy of the original citation available to the resident. The neighborhood itself changed too. The new board, elected in an open ballot process overseen by the city, was composed of actual volunteers, not power-hungry opportunists. They held monthly meetings in the open-air gazebo by the community garden, and nothing was decided without a vote. One of the first things they did was restore the homes that had been fraudulently claimed. The woman who'd lost her property over a fabricated landscaping violation was given her deed back in a small ceremony. She cried when they handed it to her. Another resident, an Army veteran who'd been told his wheelchair ramp was a hazard, was given a city-funded renovation for better access. Volunteers from the neighborhood helped install it. And the old compliance center? It was converted into a shared library and community resource room. The fake uniforms? Confiscated and destroyed. One afternoon, as I was installing new motion sensor lights on my dad's garage, a man walked up with a clipboard. I tensed until I recognized the city seal on his jacket. He introduced himself as part of the new HOA compliance oversight team, Real One this time. "Just doing routine checks," he said with a smile. "No citations today. Honestly, I just wanted to say thanks. What you did helped a lot of people." I shook his hand. "Glad it's over." He nodded. "It's not over, but it's better." Later that week, my dad got a letter not from the HOA, but from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Someone had submitted a commendation request on his behalf. Inside was a certificate recognizing his continued service to community and country. He framed it and hung it in the front room right across from the window where the flag still flew. Things didn't go back to the way they were. They went forward. More vigilant, more aware, but also more united. No more fake cops. No more threats. Just neighbors finally on the same side.